On June 21st, 2017, I sat down with all 25 of my employees and told them that I was closing down my business. As of that moment, they no longer had jobs. I'd spent the previous 11 years building up a residential gardening round into a landscape contracting business that worked all across Scotland. And the decision to close the business was one of the hardest of my life, and the consequences for my colleagues weighed heavily on me. So I'll give you a bit more background. My name's Tom Angel. As I've explained, I'm a former landscape maintenance contractor. I actually trained as a geographer originally, coming into the horticultural industry about 20 years ago. I moved to Scotland in 2005. I'm originally from London. Moved to Scotland in 2005, set up a little gardening round, and the business did really well for a number of years. For about 10 years, it was doing really well, but gradually things became more and more difficult to control. Skilled staff were harder and harder to find. The behaviour of some competitors and some commercial clients was cutthroat. The business was in a hamster wheel financially, and I was stressed and miserable. Truth be told, however, I believe that my business model was fatally flawed. I'd had the idea of transitioning my successful residential gardening business into a heavily horticulturally informed grounds maintenance contracting business, serving predominantly commercial clients. By 2017, I'd had enough of trying to do this, and so for my own mental and physical health, I decided to close the doors of the business. Now, this formative experience in my career, in my life, in fact, ultimately led me to apply to study for the M-Hort Award, with a view to better understanding what had happened in my own business, but also in order to investigate an issue that I was and still am very passionate about. Why is it that so often that the green spaces that we interact with on a day-to-day basis are so often poorly maintained? Why are they sometimes woefully neglected? Why, when we fully understand the proven benefits of quality green infrastructure, do we fail to look after them with the importance that they deserve? So that's the question. How have we got to this point? And who's looking after the landscapes of the future? This is the type of green space that I'm interested in, that I'm talking about. It's the utilitarian, functional green spaces on the likes of housing developments, industrial estates, business parks, supermarket car parks, things like this. Now, these sites will be managed by residential property managers or commercial facilities managers, and the work will be undertaken by private maintenance contractors. Now, I believe that these spaces are amongst our most important pieces of green infrastructure. And the reason for that being is that the vast majority of the population are interacting with these spaces, often completely unconsciously, on a daily basis. There's another strand to that which further underlines and emphasizes that importance. So there's other research that shows that the likes of municipal parks, as distinct from the types of green space I'm talking about, the likes of municipal parks are interacted with disproportionately by middle-class white people. So what does this mean? It means that a huge portion of the population are being deprived of the opportunity to benefit from proven green space, quality green space benefits. It means that the care we show or don't show towards our spaces is an equalities issue. It's about ensuring that everybody has access to these benefits equitably and fairly. Here's a couple of interesting quotes. Dr. Bridget Snaith a report in the aftermath of the creation of the London Olympic Park, ethnic minorities are underrepresented as users of parks and other green spaces across the UK at a far greater level than can be explained by income alone. And separately, a report by Natural England, over the previous 12 months, just under 60% of white people said they had visited the natural environment at least once a week, compared to about 40% of people from all other ethnic groups combined. This is too important an issue to be complaining about lazy operatives with leaf blowers, wasteful councils, or contractors chasing profits. We need to drill down into the complexities of this, the specific problems, in order to work out where we are now and how we can address this collaboratively. So where do we begin? So this is a not very well maintained site, not too far from me in Glasgow in Rutherglen. Now, there's quite a lot of academic sources that track the decline in the standards of our green spaces over the last 40 years or so, back to around the 1980s. Here's a selection of those sources: Reeves, year 2000, Harding, 2009, Lindholst, 2015, Lindholst again, 2017, Cosgrove, 2018, Jinvo and Namchin, 2019. The list goes on. But what's interesting about the academic research that's out there is that whilst it traces the timeline of this decline in green space quality, there's not much talk of what the specific problems are, what the actual issues are. And so part of my own research for my M.Hort dissertation was conducting a number of interviews with contractors and also with property managers, and also drawing on my own experience. And what I came up with is a list of the specific issues that we might see when we look at green space and decide that is not a quality green space. Now, I'm going to run through this list. There's not going to be any surprises here for you, but for me, this is a crucial stage to recognize where we are at now. So, what are the problems? Block pruning of shrubs into amorphous mounds of vegetation where every shrub is growing out of every other shrub. Flower beds excessively sprayed with weed killers. Gaps in flower beds where plants have died and not been replaced. Poorly mown and poorly edged grass. Generally poor soil conditions. Exhausted budgets before maintenance regimes can even begin, and broken relationships with clients, tenants, and residents. So, why is this happening? So, again, as part of my research, I conducted an extensive literature review. And what I discovered is that, you won't be surprised, the best practice instructions are out there, albeit some of it's a bit dated. And some of the industry texts do recognize some of the issues that we've spoken about there. But there are some central aspects to this, to the historical and current outlook, which I'm going to suggest have led to a spiraling decline in standards and a devaluing and de-skilling of the landscape maintenance sector. So, where do we start? Outsourcing. The outsourcing of landscape activities by council parks departments to private contractors. Now, we know from other research that outsourcing leads to a decline in standards, and the reason that's relevant to the types of green space I'm talking about was illustrated by something a managing director of a large landscape company explained to me, is that back in the 80s, which incidentally, outsourcing was beginning around late 80s, early 90s, that's when we tracked the decline in quality from. It's not the only issue, but it's part of it. This managing director, a veteran of the business, explained to me that the council parks departments had acted as an aspirational standard, a driving force for the private contractors. And he felt that really this had been lost over the years. Secondly, reduced defects periods. So in the past, implementation contractors, the folks putting the plants in the ground, were tied to a 3-year defects and maintenance period. Typically these days, this is 12 months, this is 1 year, okay? And as another contractor explained to me, Quite often, failed plants are simply replaced at the end of the defects period rather than going to the expense of watering those plants. New plants aren't being watered, and nor is there a requirement for additional weeding in their establishment period being recognised. There seems to be a real lack of knowledge about how much watering new plants need, and perhaps in our noble drive towards sustainability, a reluctance to address it. But even our most drought-tolerant planting schemes need watering in the early days and weeks. And so if we can't do that, then we shouldn't be planting them. We'd need to find other solutions. An over-reliance on generic grounds maintenance specifications, often not written by horticulturalists, no longer having the health of plants as their core concern, introducing a rigidity into operations, treating new sites and established sites just the same, and using phrases such as weed-free, which simply encourage an overspraying of flower beds. A lack of horticultural knowledge within the property management industries. And of course, these are property managers, these aren't horticulturists. But as one property manager explained to me, when they're going to the contractor at the tendering stage and asking for additional feedback on that additional contract, they're speaking to time-pressured business owners working in a highly competitive environment who know what their clients want. They want things neat and tidy. And a commonly raised issue are care of trees. Poorly designed tree pits, poorly planted trees, often too deep, and poorly established trees. A critical aspect to this is quite a lot of these trees aren't dying. What they're doing is living a curtailed life in a sickly condition. But that's difficult to negotiate within a commercial transaction. They're alive, but they're not what we want to see in a quality green landscape. And we're missing a trick with our award schemes. For example, when you join the British Association of Landscape Industries, BARLI, you join according to your turnover band, right? Like how much money you're taking in as a business. But when you put in for the well-respected awards, the awards are based on the value of individual contracts. So what this means is the big boys can invest in smaller jobs and make a clean sweep on the grounds maintenance awards, borne out by the figures. And separately, the Green Flag Awards show a significant underrepresentation of green spaces on residential developments and completely exclude green spaces that might be part of a commercial development. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a grounds maintenance industry that's used to looking after this and is often struggling to do so. And now we're needing them to look after this. The nature of our soft landscapes is changing. This isn't just an equalities issue or a horticulture issue. This is an environmental, biodiversity, and sustainability issue. So not only are we needing to address the grounds maintenance industry's current problems, we're needing it to address two massive challenges, or I would like to say two massive opportunities. Opportunities to both leverage change and I'd like to suggest address the skills gap at the same time. What are these two opportunities? Biodiversity net gain and environmental, social and governance criteria. Biodiversity net gain legislation, which became law in February this year, requires developers to leave sites in a measurably better condition in terms of biodiversity than before they broke ground. And more generally, as we all know, there is a drive towards more sustainable, more biodiverse landscapes. Separately, environmental, social and governance criteria is a really influential benchmarking system used by investors when looking at large corporations and large businesses, driving levels of corporate responsibility like we haven't seen before and leading to large blue chip clients going to their FM providers, their facilities managers, and demanding of them boxes that they can tick. And that includes quality green infrastructure. So we've looked at the historical context, we've looked at the specific issues, and we've touched on a couple of possible opportunities and challenges. So how do we wrap all this up together and work out a way forward from where we are now? So I would like to see more collaboration between the landscape and property management industries. A really good starting point for me would be good quality, generic landscape maintenance specifications that can be tweaked according to different types of site, whether it's a new site or whether it's an established site, for example. Getting back to basics with watering our new plants and mulching our flower beds. We can sit around and bemoan the demise of specific horticultural skills, and by all means, the skills gap needs to be addressed on a number of different levels, but there's some easy wins we can make, some cultural changes that can be part of good quality generic landscape maintenance specifications. Watering and mulching. More academic research. Academic research to illustrate the economic consequences of failing to water and establish our plants and trees. And we can marry this up with the positive impact that quality green space has on property prices. We can demonstrate and disseminate the fact that quality green infrastructure is an economic no-brainer. And exploiting biodiversity net gain and environmental, social and governance. The landscape industry can demonstrate to their clients that they can help them tick the right boxes by designing, implementing, managing and maintaining quality green spaces. A simple on this, a return to 3-year defects and maintenance periods. It's enough time to establish soft landscapes and a truly motivational effect on the implementation contractors. And we need to be better with our trees. Landscape architects need to be better at designing tree pits. As a landscape industry, we need to be better at planting trees. We need to be better at establishing them, taking stakes off, adjusting tree ties, this kind of stuff. And finally, industry awards. Some simple changes. We don't need more industry awards, but we can improve and expand the ones we've got. The Barley Awards, for example, could be given according to turnover bands rather than on contract value. And the scope of the Green Flag Awards could be extended. So looking ahead, you probably won't be surprised to hear me say that I don't think this is going to be a simple problem to fix. It's not. It's multi-layered, it's nuanced, and it's complex, and it requires a shift away from blaming individual industries or professions, or even dwelling too long on historical changes. But do I perhaps think we'll fix it one day? I don't actually, I'm afraid, but what I do think is that if we fight hard and in the right way, we can shift the balance. And if we can shift the balance, we can prove to more and more people that quality green infrastructure isn't just pleasant, it's critical. And if we can do that, we can improve the lives of millions of people going about their everyday business, even if they don't know it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now we got time for some questions, but please raise your hand and speak to the microphone because our friends online will need to hear you.
Thank you, Tom. That was really powerful stuff. Do you believe there is an appetite from those in charge to make the changes that you're talking about?
I think one of the reasons for some of the recommendations I was running through there about painting the economic picture of why that's important and why some of these easy wins are important is that I think that on an individual level, the appetite's there because everyone I spoke to is trying to do a good job. They're not out just, money grabbing, looking for an easy life. Everyone's wanting to do a good job. But, and I can speak from experience, it's really tough being a contractor. With the varying demands that you've got on yourself and with the workforce that's available, and there's a number of different things go into it. So I do think that leadership needs to come from the likes of RHS, Barley, Landscape Institute in providing free resources and communicating and interacting. Because with biodiversity net gain, we've got the ecological industry coming into the mix. And I sat on some seminars recently about biodiversity net gain. I sat on an ecologist one where they were all complaining about landscape architects. And then I went and sat on a landscape architecture one where they were all complaining about ecologists, right? And and there was some reasoning behind it, but I think collaboration and I think leadership from big organisations to say this is why it's important, this is how we can make it work economically, and here's some help.
Hi, Tom. Could we just go back to the slide of your to-do list? Let's put it that way.
Yes.
So the one that really struck me was about the free resources to help property managers, because I think if you can achieve that within the contracts, you can then start to push some of the other ones. So how do you see that happening? I mean, is it through the Landscaping Association? What is your view? The reason it was twigging with me, I was just thinking recently, the National Allotment Association has produced free resources to give to local councils to help them to understand what is necessary to create allotment sites. And I wondered who are the people who are going to have those free resources?
Like I say, I think RHS, Barley, Landscape Institute, potentially collaborative, but I think it needs to come from those big organisations who've got the reach, I guess, and the resources. Because I actually, you know, I really, you know, I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about this, and I've really tried to kind of pinpoint some pragmatic stuff that can actually make change. All right, and I think free resources, like a good quality generic maintenance specification that you can amend, you know, maybe even like an app that you know, so because the property manager, you know, the property managers that are going around individual sites and looking, these are, you know, probably 25-year-olds not being paid a huge amount of money, and it needs to be something quite straightforward, and they need to understand why they're doing it. It needs to fit in, right? And frankly, they're not interested in, quite often, they're not interested in these landscapes in the same way we are. So, you know, an app like that could work, but essentially ways to build a grounds maintenance specification so that it is sensible and pragmatic and straightforward. So, you know, what I used to get, you know, batted on the head with quite a lot by property managers was very rigid instructions that were in a grounds maintenance specification, you know. So when they were being sent, as happened on a number of occasions, when they were being sent in photographs of a measuring tape in the grass sward showing that the grass height was 5 millimeters wrong and things like this, right? You know, they're coming back to me and hitting me on the head as a contractor with like, this is our rigid grounds maintenance specification. Whereas if we've got something like that, and I do think a specification like that's at the heart of it, that instills a little bit of flexibility like that, then I think that's the start of making a change. But for me, I would really like to see the RHS take a lead on it, you know. Yeah, so that answers a bit.
Hi, Tom. Thanks
Hi.
for that. I've been doing grounds maintenance now for the last 30 plus years, and the sort of block maintenance that you show with the blocks of planting, I find absolutely soul destroying to do that. You know, have gardeners been sort of questioned and asked about how they feel about that type of work? Because I know you didn't talk about that very much, about how the actual workforce feel about doing that sort of work. My work ranges, I do that sort of block management, and I also do individual gardens, which are much more interesting, and it's much more enjoyable. I think that gardeners need to be, the research needs to be done into how this affects people who are actually working in the industry themselves, and how we can improve how changing the specifications for the block management will actually be good for the workforce and their mental health and their well-being as well. I wonder if you had any views on that particularly.
Do you mean in terms of them finding it kind of pretty demotivating, just going out with hedge trimmers?
Absolutely,
yeah. I think so. I mean, certainly, you know, in my work as a consultant, I've been out to sites where that has got to such a point where the site is no longer salvageable, and I can't. Well, I know it's not enjoyable going out and looking after those sites. So, I think that, you know, of all the issues that I highlighted there, I think the block pruning one is one of the most difficult, and I think that there's different strands to that. And I think there is an element of, landscape architects are sometimes tied to a particular plant palette, and they can only put in the bottom tillers and the hypericums and stuff like this. But in terms of
standards can drop as as workforce become demotivated.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just kind of was formulating in my head a little bit, is that you end up with this kind of spiraling effect, where they know all that's expected is to shop things into things. But I think that to a degree it needs to come from a step back, because if we're creating if you go in you'll know yourself, if you go in as a landscaper and a site's been block pruned for the last 20 years, that's you can't expect that of a grounds maintenance contractor to go, oh, right, actually, we're going to separate all these at our own expense and take all our own time and start pruning everything at the right time. So it is a long-term change there. And I think that the managing director who spoke to me about the loss of the kind of driving force that came from council parks departments, something he spoke to me about, which I thought was something that had legs, was starting to create areas of higher visibility pruning and lower visibility pruning areas. And for me, that's maybe something where we could start introducing it. Perhaps as that gets communicated down to the operatives, there's then more of an understanding that comes with the landscape then. So for example, you know yourself that with the best will in the world, if the shrubs are at an entrance of an office or something like that, or of a building, you've got to cut them back. There's no, it might be the wrong time of year, but you've got to cut them back because people need to walk in and out. But there may be areas further back where we can have, you have a matrix of grass cutting, and we're not cutting that bit so often. And those shrubs, we really are making sure they get done at the right time of year. But to be honest with you, I'm not surprised, given what you do for a living, you've got right into the nub of it, and one of the most difficult things to address. And I think that probably making a true change in block pruning, I think, is probably going to take a generation, stuff.
Have you looked at other countries as to how they're managing their green spaces? Because thinking about being my travels, it seems to be those countries that have got better managed green spaces. The workforce is government parks departments. It is directly employed teams that are managing those green spaces, and it's a government initiative rather than the contractors. Did you look anywhere else to sort of compare with?
So the only place where I, as part of the research, I didn't, because in actual fact, my dissertation focused on Scotland, because that's where I have most experience. But I'm from down here, and I'm pretty confident it's a UK picture. So as part of the research, I didn't go and investigate other countries. However, I've spent quite a lot of time in France, and I think the problem is as bad or worse in France, I would say. What I can tell you, I'm just a little bit too young to really remember when to be working when the council parks departments were taking a real lead on it. But having spoken and had some lively exchanges on LinkedIn about, there's some passionate people who really will tell you, anecdotally, of course, that the deterioration in standards started around the same time as they tie it precisely to outsourcing. What I can tell you from that is anecdotal, but what I can tell you is that from research, outsourcing leads to a decline in standards. Declining standards in Britain runs roughly to when we started outsourcing. So, yeah.
I think my question almost ties in with the outsourcing, because have you looked at the economical effect? Because when you have all these shrubs that are hedge cut, that is a quick job, quicker than hand pruning the shrubs. Obviously, when it's quicker, it will cost less money. So what is your thinking? Do the developers, do they have to spend more money to implement all the changes? How is that gonna work out?
That is at the very core of this. And I think that whenever I hear people making lazy criticisms of grounds maintenance operatives, I've seen the complexities of it. And like I say, that financial question is what's hitting you over the head as a contractor. All right. It is really difficult. This is why, like I say, top ones here, you know, creating maintenance specifications and letting that trickle down, I think needs to come from organisations like the RHS with that kind of leadership and reach. Watering and mulching, I think, is a cultural change, which is simple fixes. Because another conversation that's sometimes been had to me, and this is why it's a good question you make. People suggesting to me, "Oh, we need to start doing this. We need to make that change," and you know. But all I'm thinking is, I know as a contractor that can't happen because the economic situation, right, the finances that are involved in it, and the chain of command. All right. There will still be a cost attached to this, but I think something like watering new plants and mulching flower beds are simple things that can transform how landscapes look. You could start doing that next week, you know. So I think that it's critical that we're pragmatic about this, make little changes at that level, and bigger changes at the levels of like things like the RHS, because it's no good. What you're not going to, and this you know, again is another what you say, you're not going to get change by moaning about grounds maintenance contractors or attacking the grounds maintenance contractors, because at the moment what's happening is that the grounds maintenance contractors are tied into these very rigid specifications and then being battered on the head when they don't do it exactly right. And that is just this endless process, you know. So the economic element of this and finding the pragmatic solutions is absolutely key. You're absolutely right.